Welcome to Behind the Books. So, today I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about how I became an author, how I became a writer, and my travels to that profession. It was a bit of a winding road, but you'll see that there were consistencies all the way through. The short version really is how did I become a writer? Reading and practice. That's the short version. But you didn't come here for the short version. So here's the deal. Really, it began with my parents. They would read to us every night before bed. We'd get stories all the time. And it even became a thing where I read the same story so many times that I would remember them. And it became sort of a party trick when my parents had friends over. There was one particular story. It was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And it was a series of books called Golden Books. And you may have some in your collection in your library at home. But they have the little gold edges, and they're hardcover books, and they're small, and they're just wonderful. And it was a golden book of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And that was the first book that I had memorized word for word from beginning to end. And my parents' friends would be over, and they'd be having tea or whatever. And at one point or another, before I went to bed, I would go on stage and I would recite the story, and everybody would applaud, and I'd feel really good about my memory and being a storyteller and all that. And so that was at a really young age. And so that the next natural thing that happened was I thought, well, I'm pretty good at this at home. I wonder if I could do it at school. So I actually entered a storytelling contest in grade 1. And I think I've told this story a number of times at different school visits and stuff. But it was pretty spectacular. There was my school was kindergarten to grade 6. And everybody had an opportunity. Not everybody participated. There were a few kids for each grade level that got up on stage and told their story. I had memorized one of my favorite books at the time, Robert Munsch's Mortimer. And Robert Munsch's Mortimer is a story, if you haven't read it before, you need to read it. But it's all about a little boy who won't go to bed. And every time, different members of his family try to tuck him in, and then they go downstairs. As soon as they get downstairs, he starts going, bang, bang, rada bing, bang, gonna sing my noise all day. He's gonna make his noise all day. And it was this really silly story. And so I got up on stage and I performed my memorized version of this story. And all the students got to vote for who they thought the best storyteller was. And I'd heard some other people get up, in grade 4, grade 5, grade 6, that were like really great stories, and I really enjoyed them. But I won. And when I was in grade 1, I was voted the favorite storyteller. And that really gave me a lot of confidence. And I started memorizing other stories and trying to tell different stories and really get the actions in and the sound effects and stuff. And I really was having a good time. And I started to think about writing my own stories and trying to tell those. Now, writing my own stories, they didn't go over as well because I was writing some very simple stories. I wasn't really sure what I was doing. And it wasn't until my dad took me. My dad was a lawyer, and so he would make contracts between different people and make sure they would agree on different things. And so he took me to work, and it was kind of a morning that I was supposed to be at his office, and I got really bored really quick. And so he gave me a highlighter, a blue highlighter, and he gave me some folded sheets of paper, and he said, hey, you should draw us a little something. And I didn't want to draw. I decided to write. And as it turned out, I ended up writing my very first book ever. And this is it. I still have it because my parents are awesome and they kept it. And this is my lovely drawing of the Phantom, or is it the Phantom's Mansion? There you go, the Phantom's Mansion. For a long time, I had thought this was called The Phantom in the Forest. I had this in my head that's what the title was. But I drew that little picture on the front. And you can see the words inside too. And it says, once upon a time there was a mansion, and a phantom lived in the mansion, of course. And he was a mean phantom, and he put evil spells on people. So, one hot day, it was very hot, I was called up by the police, and they told me that they had a case for me. So this whole thing is based on the fact that a couple of kids are undercover police because no one's going to suspect that they're undercover police. And it's me and my friend Steve. And me and my friend Steve were these undercover cops in the story. And we went and we solved the mystery. And I think we had to break like a lamp or something to get sort of almost a genie type thing. And the Phantom stopped haunting the forest, the nearby forest near the mansion, all that kind of stuff. But that was my first story that I'd written in my first book. And so that was a lot of fun. And having that and being able to show that to people really gave me the taste for having a story in a book format and holding it in my hand and going, I made this. And so I started to try to do more. And a lot of times when I was younger, I couldn't write fast enough for all the ideas in my head. And so my parents actually had an old typewriter. And if you don't know what a typewriter is, Google it. But you'd press down on the keys and these arms would come up with ink on them, and they'd press on the ink ribbon, and these arms that came up and hit the paper that was in the typewriter, they'd hit the paper and then hit the ink ribbon, and the letters would appear on the page. And if you made any mistakes, there wasn't really a way to correct it. You just had to scratch it out with a pencil and type the word again. But I started writing mystery stories because at the time, I was super into the Hardy Boys. These guys were mystery-solving brothers, and of course, I had a younger brother who was close in age to me, and we did everything together. So these stories were really, really good, and he and I both enjoyed them very, very much. And this is actually like an original copy of the hardcover I had as a kid. And again, my parents are awesome, and they still have these kicking around their house. So yeah, I was writing mystery stories, and I wasn't really good at making the mystery. The mystery was always very obvious, but I was having a lot of fun and experimenting with doing different things. I started reading a lot of Stephen King and Dean Koontz as I got older. Now those are both writers that write very sort of spooky or scary stories, sometimes really gross stories as well. They're really made for adults, maybe some older teenagers, but made for adults. And I really started to enjoy those stories. I liked being creeped out. I liked being scared. And I started trying to write stories like that. But the best Stephen King book that I've ever read, and when you get a little bit older and you decide, you know what, it's time for me to write like a chapter book, Stephen King's On Writing. This, you have to have it. If you are a writer, you have to have this in your house. The advice and ideas and that come out of this book will help you be a better writer. I cannot recommend this enough. Stephen King's On Writing. It's not a storybook. It's what they call a non-fiction book, and it's all about advice and details on how to go about organizing yourself, organizing your ideas, and different methods to create awesome stories. And what I started doing after I started writing spooky stories, I wanted to try something different. So I was reading some science fiction stories, stuff that would travel into space or future stories and stuff like that. And there's a wonderful author called Orson Scott Card who wrote a book called Ender's Game. And there are several books in the Ender's Game series, but honestly, the first one, if you don't read any of the others, the first one's the one you got to read. They actually made a movie of it several years ago as well. The movie was okay. The book is much better. But Orson Scott Card also wrote a book about how to write science fiction. And it was really how to write science fiction and fantasy. And this is another one that you have to have. If you're a writer, you got to put it in your own personal library. Some wonderful tips in here, including he talks a lot about world creation. And I think that's important too, because a lot of you guys end up playing Minecraft and stuff like that, and you're doing a bit of that. You're building the world around you, and there are certain rules that world has to behave with. And when you're an author, it's the same thing. You have to build your world, and if you decide your story is taking place on a planet in a different galaxy, you really have to understand, well, how does space travel work in your world? You don't need to know the science behind it, but you need to understand, like, how fast can people actually travel between planets? Because if there's an emergency on one planet and your hero is on a different planet, how long is it actually going to take for him to get there? Are there different modes of travel that he might be able to do? And so those are sort of, what dangers would be in the way. Those are sort of things you want to plan out in advance and to build your world so that as you're writing your story, you understand what your characters can or cannot do. Now, then I grew up I'm in high school and I'm having to take English class, and I didn't like it at first, but I learned to really, really love some Shakespeare. And whether it is King Lear or Romeo and Juliet or Much Ado About Nothing, which is probably one of my favorites, Shakespeare is incredible because Shakespeare is a poet. And he wrote incredible plays that people would perform. And one of the most wonderful things about the way he writes is that the language that the characters are using is so poetic at times, you're not really sure what he's saying, or sometimes he's saying not just one thing, he's saying two things at the same time. And it's about decoding the secret message in his writing. And I loved that there was a hidden message. I loved decoding and seeing what his other meanings were. And that led me to write a lot of poetry myself. And that was a really great feeling. That was because in high school, I was getting bullied a little bit. I would date some girls and we'd go on dates, but then we'd break up and I'd feel really bad. And it was a way for me to deal with my emotions and writing this poetry. And it was Shakespeare who sort of unlocked the secret of how to write poetry in a certain way. And what that turned into is my opportunity to join a band. Because what happens in a band? Well, a band writes music together and someone's got to write the lyrics to the song. And more often than not, the lyrics to a song, well, they're poetic, they're poems. And so I ended up singing with a band in high school, actually a couple of different bands, Styrofoam Cathedral. Don't worry, you wouldn't have heard of us. And then the Humming Houses of Haxby. And so these two bands that I was part of, it was a ton of fun. Oh, you know what? There was a third one called Corduroy Blue. But that was much, much later. Anyway, I wrote the lyrics and I sang with all these bands. And it was an amazing opportunity to get out and be brave again and be in front of an audience. And just like my storytelling in grade 1, I was standing up on stage with a rock band telling a story in a very different way with poetry. So life went on. I went to school, I got jobs, and I was still doing my writing. I was really settled on my style of writing. I always liked a little bit of, an adventure story, but with a little paranormal twist. Something, some superpowers or something ghosty. I always liked that. That's kind of how I settled into the stuff I liked to write. And I was writing for teenagers and adults. And my wife and I wanted to put a family together. We wanted to have children. And as it turned out, we couldn't have children of our own. And so we ended up adopting two beautiful brothers. And these two beautiful brothers actually made two of my dreams come true. They made me a daddy, and they made me an author. And the way they did that was I was making up bedtime stories for them. And making up these bedtime stories, I did it, not on a regular schedule, every once in a while when we felt like it. And I would make up these stories off the top of my head. I would ask them what they wanted to hear about, get a few ideas from them, and then I would include all their ideas in the story. And that is how the Mostly Made Up Adventures of Malcolm and Cooper, my series of books, ended up being created finally. But it was, having to take these stories and eventually put them in a book. I really did my research to figure out if there was like a secret, to writing a good children's book. And as it turns out, there is a bit of a formula to it. And I share that formula regularly with my Start a Story Young Writers Workshop. And that has been just another amazing experience that all started with my love of writing and telling stories, is the ability to inspire young writers like you guys. And it's been a wonderful gift to be able to give back and hopefully get you guys in 20 years or 30 years down the road, maybe you're making a video and telling your fans about your experience and how you became a writer. So what I want you to notice, though, is how much reading there was. I was reading Shakespeare, I was reading science fiction, I was reading spooky horror books, I was reading children's picture books to understand how to take my boys' made-up bedtime stories and turn them into my own real picture books. There is a lot of reading that you've got to do to really empower yourself to become a better writer. You'll learn different skills from different writers. You'll learn to understand the way you like a story to be told because you really enjoy a particular book and you don't enjoy a different book. And so you start to find your own style by taking a piece from this author here, a piece from this author here, and you create your very own style with being basically a mashup of all the different authors that you enjoy. So that's what I want you to take away from this more than anything else, is that to be a powerful writer, to be a good writer, you really do need to do a lot of reading. You don't have to read the same genre. You don't have to read kids' books if you want to make kids' books. You don't have to read chapter books if you want to make chapter books. But it definitely helps. And honestly, that is how I became a writer. My parents read to me. I learned to love stories and storytelling. I was inspired to write my own. And all sorts of different authors, including poets, inspired me. I had different experiences like singing in a band and winning storytelling contests to continue to give me all these different strengths and different ideas about how to present a story and decode the secret recipe to creating stories. And yeah, that's why I'm never going to stop creating, because every day, and every book that I read, I learn something new. And so it adds to my arsenal of ideas, and it allows me to never stop creating. And I hope you never stop too. I hope this has been good. You guys, take care of yourselves, take care of your families, and always have fun creating.